Picture this. You're standing in the heart of London, surrounded by hundreds of tourists, phones raised high, capturing the legendary stoic silence of the Queen's Guard. The red coat, the towering black hat, the unwavering discipline that has become a symbol of British tradition for centuries. These guards are trained to remain motionless regardless of what happens around them, rain, shine, or even the most obnoxious tourist behavior. But what happens when someone crosses a line so shocking, so utterly disrespectful, that even the most disciplined soldier in the world can't ignore it? What happens when wealth meets tradition, when American arrogance collides with British dignity, and when one moment of pure disrespect triggers a chain of events that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted? This isn't just another tourist story. This isn't about someone taking a silly selfie or trying to make the guard laugh. This is about the moment when one man's sense of entitlement met its match, and how a single act of disrespect became a lesson that would echo far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. Get ready to witness how one spit changed everything, and why sometimes karma doesn't just knock. It kicks down the door. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace as tourists began gathering for the daily spectacle that had become as British as tea and crumpets. Among the crowd, phones were already buzzing with excitement, cameras clicking, and tour guides rehearsing their well-practiced speeches about the Queen's Guard and their legendary discipline. Marcus Goldstein stepped out of his luxury chauffeur-driven Bentley, straightening his designer suit jacket with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been told no. At 42, Marcus had built his fortune in tech startups, selling 3 companies for a combined total of over $2 billion. Money had become his language, his solution to every problem, and his shield against any consequence. To Marcus, everything and everyone had a price. The chauffeur held the door open as Marcus surveyed the scene before him. "Just another tourist trap," he muttered to his assistant, Jennifer, who was frantically checking emails on her phone while trying to keep up with his brisk pace. "I don't know why everyone makes such a big deal about these guys standing still. I could hire better security for my yacht." Jennifer nodded absently, more focused on managing Marcus's overpacked schedule than engaging with his commentary. She had been working for him for 3 years, long enough to know that his wealth had inflated his ego to dangerous proportions. Every trip was an opportunity for Marcus to prove his superiority, every interaction a chance to demonstrate that money could solve anything. The crowd around the palace gates was thickening as families with children, elderly couples, and excited teenagers jockeyed for the best viewing positions. The famous red-coated guards stood at their posts, rifles at their sides, their faces hidden beneath the iconic black bearskin hats. Their stillness was almost supernatural, as if they were statues rather than living, breathing human beings. Guard James Mitchell had been standing at his post for 43 minutes. At 28 years old, he had served in Afghanistan, completed 2 tours of duty that had tested his mental and physical limits in ways most people could never imagine. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace might seem like ceremonial duty to outsiders, but James understood the honor and responsibility that came with protecting the royal family. Every tourist's camera flash, every child's giggle, every attempt to make him break character was just background noise to his trained military mind. James had seen it all during his 2 years of palace duty. Tourists who tried to touch him, people who shouted jokes or insults, children who threw things, and adults who behaved worse than children. He had learned to filter it all out, to maintain the dignity and discipline that his position demanded. His training had prepared him for everything, or so he thought. Marcus pushed through the crowd with little regard for the other tourists. A Japanese family taking photos found themselves suddenly shoved aside as Marcus claimed the prime spot directly in front of James's post. An elderly British woman shooting him a disapproving look received nothing but a dismissive glance in return. Marcus had paid for the exclusive London experience package that cost more than most people's yearly salary, and he intended to get his money's worth. "This is it," Marcus announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This is what all the fuss is about." A guy in a costume, standing still. He pulled out his phone and began taking photos, but not the respectful, distant shots that other tourists were capturing. Marcus moved closer, angling for dramatic selfies with James in the background. The crowd around them began to murmur. Parents pulled their children back slightly, sensing that something uncomfortable was developing. Other tourists started recording, initially thinking they might capture something amusing for their social media feeds. Marcus noticed the attention he was drawing and seemed to feed off it. "You know what the problem with this whole thing is?" he continued, his voice growing louder. No customer service. In America, if someone's doing a job like this, they'd at least acknowledge the people paying to see them. Jennifer finally looked up from her phone, recognizing the familiar tone in her boss's voice that usually preceded trouble. Marcus, maybe we should just take a few photos and move on to the next stop on the tour, she suggested quietly. But Marcus was just getting started. He had an audience now, phones recording, people watching, and the intoxicating feeling of being the center of attention. Hey there, soldier boy, he called directly to James. I know you can hear me. How about a smile for the camera? I'll make it worth your while. James remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead as he had been trained. Inside his military mind, protocols were running like clockwork. Tourist interaction attempts were standard. Maintain position. Do not engage. Protect the dignity of the crown. But something about this particular tourist tone was different. There was a cruelty in it that went beyond typical tourist ignorance. Marcus stepped closer, now just 3 feet from James. Come on, buddy. I've got a 5,000-pound tip with your name on it if you just give me one little reaction. That's probably more than you make in 6 months, right? The crowd was getting uncomfortable. Children were asking their parents why the man was being mean to the guard. Other tourists were starting to distance themselves from Marcus, not wanting to be associated with his behavior. But Marcus interpreted their discomfort as fascination with his boldness. You know what I think? Marcus continued, his voice taking on a nasty edge. I think this whole thing is a joke. These guys aren't real soldiers. They're just actors in costumes, putting on a show for tourists like us. There's no way a real military man would just stand there and take this kind of disrespect. James felt his jaw clench slightly, the only outward sign of his growing irritation. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan. He had watched friends die in service to their country. He had earned every commendation on his chest through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Being called a fake soldier by an entitled tourist cut deeper than Marcus could possibly understand. But James held his position. His training was stronger than his anger. His commitment to duty was greater than his personal pride. He would not break, not for money, not for insults, not for anything. Marcus saw the slight tension in James's jaw and misinterpreted it as a sign that he was winning. Oh, look at that. I think I got a reaction. Did everyone see that? The statue moved. He laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the courtyard. What else can we get him to do? The atmosphere around the palace gates had shifted completely. What started as a normal tourist gathering had become something ugly. Other visitors were actively avoiding Marcus now, some even asking security personnel if something could be done about his behavior. But Marcus was standing on public ground, not technically touching the guard or breaking any laws. The security staff were keeping a close eye on the situation, but couldn't intervene yet. Marcus pulled out his wallet, a thick leather billfold stuffed with cash. Okay, soldier boy, let's try this again. 10,000 pounds. American dollars. That's even better for you, right? Probably 20,000 in your money. He held the cash in front of James's face. All you have to do is break character for 10 seconds. Smile, wave, say hello. Easy money. James's breathing remained controlled, but his heart rate was increasing. The disrespect was becoming personal in a way that went beyond typical tourist behavior. This wasn't just someone trying to get a reaction for a funny photo. This was someone actively mocking his service, his commitment, his honor. The crowd had grown larger as word spread about the confrontation. People were recording everything now, some live streaming to social media, others just documenting what they sensed might become a significant moment. The energy was building towards something, though no one could predict exactly what. Marcus pocketed the cash when James didn't respond and moved even closer. You know what? I was wrong about you being fake. You're real all right. Real pathetic. What kind of man just stands there while someone talks to him like this? Where I come from, a man would defend himself. Jennifer finally put away her phone and tried to intervene. Marcus, please. People are staring. This isn't appropriate. But Marcus waved her off. Appropriate? I'll tell you what's not appropriate. Taking money from tourists to watch some guy play dress up and pretend to be important. This whole thing is a scam, and everyone's just going along with it because they're too polite to say anything. The irony of an American tourist calling others too polite was lost on Marcus entirely. He was now operating in full narcissistic mode, where any attention was good attention, and any reaction was validation of his importance. James had been standing at his post for over an hour now. His feet were solid, his posture perfect, his rifle held precisely as regulations demanded. But inside his military-trained mind, something was beginning to shift. Every soldier had a breaking point, A line that once crossed changed everything. Marcus was approaching that line without even realizing it existed. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the cobblestones. The crowd continued to grow, drawn by the spectacle of watching someone push the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Phones recorded every moment, capturing what would soon become one of the most shared videos in social media history. Marcus looked around at all the cameras pointed in his direction and smiled. He was the star of his own show, the center of attention at one of the world's most famous landmarks. In his mind, he was demonstrating his superiority, showing everyone watching that he wasn't intimidated by tradition, ceremony, or fake authority. But traditions exist for reasons that go deeper than ceremony. Some lines are drawn in permanent ink, marking boundaries that separate civilization from chaos, respect from contempt, honor from humiliation. Marcus was about to cross one of those lines, and when he did, everything would change in ways that neither he nor anyone watching could possibly anticipate. The stage was set. The players were in position. The cameras were rolling. All that remained was for Marcus to take that final step across a line that had remained uncrossed for centuries of British military tradition. What happened next would shock the world. Marcus stepped back for a moment, surveying the growing crowd with satisfaction. The attention was intoxicating, and he could see that his behavior had become the main attraction. Tour groups had actually stopped their planned routes to watch what was unfolding. Street vendors nearby were doing better business as people lingered to see what would happen next. In Marcus's twisted logic, he was providing entertainment value. You know what the real problem is here? Marcus announced to his impromptu audience, gesturing toward James like he was giving a business presentation. This is exactly what's wrong with the service industry today. No flexibility, no customer engagement, no understanding that the customer is always right. Several people in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing the tone of someone who had clearly never worked in service himself. James remained motionless, but inside his mind, memories were surfacing unbidden. He remembered his first deployment to Afghanistan, standing watch in 110-degree heat while insurgents took potshots at his position. He remembered holding his dying friend Tommy after an IED explosion, promising him that his sacrifice meant something, that protecting people was the highest calling a soldier could have. He remembered coming home to a country where most people had no idea what military service actually meant, where his uniform generated polite thanks, but little real understanding. Now here he stood, protecting a tradition that represented everything he had sworn to defend, while a man who had clearly never sacrificed anything for anyone mocked that service for entertainment. Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time switching to video mode. "I'm going to document this for my followers," he announced. 10 million people need to see how ridiculous this whole thing is. He began recording a selfie video with James in the background. "Hey everyone, Marcus here, coming to you live from London, where I'm trying to get some reaction from these fake soldiers. Watch this." He turned the camera toward James and moved closer again. "So far I've offered him $20,000, and he won't even blink. Either he's the most dedicated actor in the world, or the British military has some serious training issues." He laughed at his own joke, completely oblivious to how his words were landing with both the crowd and his target. A middle-aged British man in the crowd finally spoke up. "Excuse me, sir, but that's quite enough. These gentlemen are serving their country with dignity, and they deserve your respect." His accent carried the authority of someone accustomed to proper behavior. Marcus turned toward the voice, his face flushing with irritation. "Oh, here we go? The local expert wants to educate the American tourist. Let me guess, you think this guy is some kind of hero for standing still in a costume?" The British man straightened his shoulders. "I think he's a professional soldier doing his duty, and you're behaving like an absolute tosser." A few people in the crowd murmured agreement, but no one stepped forward to physically intervene. This public criticism only fueled Marcus's anger. Being called out in front of his audience was unacceptable. His whole identity was built on being superior, on having the last word, on winning every confrontation through sheer force of wealth and personality. "You want to see a real soldier?" he snapped. "A real soldier would tell you exactly what he thinks of your backwards little country and your pretend military pageant." He wheeled back toward James, his face now red with rage. "Isn't that right, soldier boy? Why don't you tell these people what you really think? Tell them how you stand here like a trained monkey while rich Americans pay to gawk at you. Tell them how you're nothing but a tourist attraction." The crowd was now completely silent except for the clicking of cameras and the hum of video recording. Even the children seemed to sense that something terrible was building. Parents were quietly moving their families further back, but no one wanted to miss whatever was about to happen. James felt something shift inside his chest. His breathing remained controlled, but his heart was pounding with a rhythm he recognized from combat situations. His body was preparing for action while his mind fought to maintain discipline. Every fiber of his training said to hold position, but every instinct of his humanity was screaming that this had gone too far. Marcus sensed the energy in the crowd and mistook their horrified fascination for encouragement. "You know what I think happened here?" he continued, his voice rising. "I think they take the guys who aren't smart enough for real military duty and stick them in pretty costumes to entertain tourists. I think this whole thing is just welfare for people who can't handle actual jobs." That was the moment. Those words hit James like a physical blow. Welfare. As if his 2 tours in Afghanistan, his Purple Heart for wounds received in service, his perfect service record, and his dedication to duty were somehow charity. As if standing guard over the royal family was somehow less honorable than making money by insulting people. But James held his position. His training was strong. His commitment was absolute. He would not break. Marcus could see he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted, and his frustration was mounting. He had built his entire fortune on getting results, on pushing until people gave him what he wanted. This guard's refusal to respond was becoming personal, a challenge to everything Marcus believed about the power of money and pressure. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried further than his shouting had. "If money won't motivate you, maybe shame will." He stepped closer again, now within arm's reach of James. "I want everyone to see what happens when someone who thinks they're better than everyone else meets someone who actually is better than everyone else." What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but it was captured from dozens of angles by phones, cameras, and even a few professional photographers who happened to be in the area. The moment would be slowed down, analyzed, shared, and replayed millions of times in the coming days. Marcus gathered saliva in his mouth and spat directly onto James's uniform, the moisture hitting the red fabric just above the brass buttons and slowly beginning to drip down. The crowd gasped collectively, a sound like air being sucked out of a room. Several people shouted in outrage. A woman screamed. Children began crying without understanding why. The British man who had spoken up earlier started forward, but was held back by his wife. But the most shocking reaction came from the person no one expected to move. James's head turned. Not his body, not his stance, just his head, rotating slowly until his eyes met Marcus's directly for the first time. The movement was so unexpected, so precise, and so controlled that it was somehow more intimidating than any dramatic gesture could have been. For the first time since stepping out of his luxury car, Marcus felt a chill of real fear. James's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet enough that only Marcus and the people closest to them could hear it clearly. But in the absolute silence that had fallen over the crowd, every word carried with crystal clarity. "Sir," James said, his voice carrying the controlled authority of someone accustomed to command in life-or-death situations, "you have just committed assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard while on duty at a royal residence. You are under citizen's arrest." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Marcus's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious. It was just spit. I didn't hurt anyone." James's eyes never left Marcus's face. Assault in British law includes any unwanted physical contact or the application of force, including spitting. You have also committed an offense under the Public Order Act and potentially treason for assaulting a member of the Royal Household Guard. The crowd was pressing closer now, phones raised high, everyone wanting to capture what was clearly becoming a historic moment. Marcus looked around wildly, suddenly, realizing that his audience wasn't on his side anymore. The faces surrounding him showed disgust, anger, and anticipation for whatever was about to happen to him. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm an American citizen. You can't arrest me for spitting. I want to call the American embassy." James remained perfectly still except for his head, which continued to track Marcus's every movement like a predator watching prey. "The embassy will be notified after you are processed through the British legal system, sir. I suggest you remain exactly where you are until proper authorities arrive." That was when Marcus made his second catastrophic mistake of the day. Instead of staying put and trying to de-escalate the situation, instead of apologizing and hoping for leniency, instead of recognizing that he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, Marcus let his ego make the decision. "I'm not staying anywhere," he declared, turning toward the crowd. "This is insane. I'm leaving." He started to walk away, pushing through the tourists who were no longer respectfully making space for him, but actively blocking his path. "Get out of my way," he shouted. "I'm going back to my hotel, and then I'm calling my lawyers. This whole country is going to hear about this." James's head turned to follow Marcus's movement, and when Marcus was about 10 feet away, James did something that no one in the crowd expected. He took a step forward. Then another. The Queen's Guard, who had stood motionless for over an hour, who had maintained perfect stillness while being insulted, mocked, and assaulted, was walking. Not marching in the ceremonial style that tourists sometimes saw during changing of the guard, but walking with the purposeful stride of a soldier who had made a decision. The crowd parted like water as James moved through them, his rifle still perfectly positioned, his uniform impeccable despite the wet stain on his chest, his bearing absolutely military. But he was moving, following Marcus, and his presence behind the fleeing tourist was more intimidating than any chase scene in any movie. Marcus looked back over his shoulder and saw James following him. The sight of the perfectly uniformed guard in pursuit sent a spike of panic through him. "Stay back," he shouted. "Don't come any closer. I'm warning you." But James continued walking at exactly the same pace, never speeding up, never slowing down, maintaining a distance of about 8 feet behind Marcus no matter how fast or slow the frightened tourist moved. The crowd was following now, a growing parade of people with phones and cameras, all documenting what was rapidly becoming the most unusual tourist incident in Buckingham Palace history. Street vendors were abandoning their carts to join the procession. Tour guides were frantically calling their companies to report what was happening. Social media was exploding with live streams and instant uploads. Marcus broke into a run, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the cobblestones. He glanced back again to see James maintaining the same measured pace, neither running nor stopping, just following with the inexorable persistence of justice itself. "This is crazy," Marcus panted as he ran. "Someone help me. This guy is stalking me." But no one in the crowd seemed inclined to help. If anything, they were enjoying the spectacle of watching Marcus's panic. The same people he had dismissed as inferior just minutes ago were now his audience for a very different kind of performance. Marcus's expensive suit was beginning to show sweat stains, and his perfectly styled hair was coming undone as he stumbled through the streets of London with a Queen's Guard in quiet pursuit. Behind him, the crowd was growing larger, and ahead of him, the London Metropolitan Police were receiving calls about an unusual situation developing near Buckingham Palace. What had started as Marcus's attempt to prove his superiority had become something entirely different. He was no longer in control of the situation, no longer the star of his own show, no longer able to buy his way out of consequences. The chase was just beginning, and Marcus was about to discover that in London, some traditions have teeth. The chase through London's historic streets became something out of a surreal movie. Marcus, in his $1,000 suit and Italian leather shoes, stumbled and ran through crowds of bewildered tourists while behind him, Guard James Mitchell maintained his steady, measured pace like some sort of uniformed force of nature. The contrast was striking: panic versus control, chaos versus discipline, guilt versus duty. Marcus's breathing was becoming labored as he turned down Victoria Street, his expensive clothing now wrinkled and stained with sweat. He had always prided himself on his physical fitness, maintaining a personal trainer and private gym in each of his 3 homes, but running in leather-soled shoes on unfamiliar streets while in a state of panic was revealing the difference between gym fitness and real-world endurance. Behind him, James continued his pursuit with the mechanical precision of his military training. His breathing remained controlled, his posture perfect, his rifle held in exactly the regulation position despite the fact that he was now several blocks away from his assigned post. To the growing crowd following this unprecedented scene, James looked less like a ceremonial guard and more like an unstoppable force of military justice. The crowd following them had swollen to nearly 200 people. Tourists abandoned their planned sightseeing to join what was becoming the most entertaining spectacle London had seen in years. Local office workers stepped out of buildings to watch the parade pass by. Street performers stopped their acts to follow the action. Even London's famously unflappable taxi drivers were slowing down to get a better look at the unusual procession. Marcus pulled out his phone while running, trying to call his assistant Jennifer while simultaneously documenting his own persecution. Jennifer, where are you? I need help. This crazy soldier is chasing me through London." His words came out in breathless gasps as he struggled to maintain both his pace and his phone call. But Jennifer was nowhere to be found. In the chaos of Marcus's sudden departure from Buckingham Palace, she had been separated from him and was now frantically trying to locate her boss, while fielding increasingly urgent calls from his business partners and legal team back in America. Social media was exploding with live coverage of the chase. The hashtag Guard Chase was trending within minutes as dozens of people live-streamed different angles of the pursuit. News outlets were picking up the story, with BBC London interrupting regular programming to show aerial footage from their traffic helicopter. The story was going viral faster than any traditional news cycle could have managed. Marcus turned onto Whitehall, hoping to lose his pursuer in the maze of government buildings. But James followed with the same inexorable determination. The guard's knowledge of London streets was proving superior to Marcus's panicked navigation. Every turn Marcus made seemed to lead him deeper into areas where James appeared completely comfortable and familiar. A group of American tourists near Westminster Abbey recognized Marcus as he stumbled past them. "Hey, aren't you Marcus Goldstein? The tech guy?" one of them called out. Marcus kept running, but not before the tourists had recorded him fleeing from a British guard, adding another layer of humiliation to his predicament. The irony wasn't lost on the crowd that Marcus, who had built his fortune on social media and viral marketing, was now the unwilling star of the most viral video in recent memory. His own tools of success were being turned against him, broadcasting his humiliation to a global audience in real time. Marcus's expensive watch showed that he had been running for nearly 20 minutes. His legs were cramping, his chest was burning, and his designer clothes were soaked with sweat. But every time he slowed down or looked for somewhere to hide, James would appear behind him, maintaining that same steady pace, never gaining ground, but never falling behind either. The psychological effect was devastating. Marcus had never been in a situation where money couldn't solve his problems, where his status didn't immediately grant him special treatment, where his American passport didn't open doors and smooth over difficulties. The relentless pursuit by someone who clearly couldn't be bought, threatened, or reasoned with was destroying his fundamental understanding of how the world worked. Near Parliament Square, Marcus made another desperate phone call, this time to his lawyer in New York. David, I need immediate legal help. I'm in London, and some British soldier is literally chasing me through the streets. This is insane. I need diplomatic immunity or something." His lawyer, David Chun, tried to calm him down while simultaneously researching British law on his computer. "Marcus, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. What did you do to this soldier?" "I didn't do anything. I was just taking some pictures and making some jokes, and then I might have accidentally spit a little bit when I was talking, and now he thinks he can arrest me." This is discrimination against Americans. Even through the phone, David could hear the sounds of a crowd and running footsteps. "Marcus, are you saying you spat on a British soldier?" "It wasn't on purpose." "Well, maybe a little bit on purpose, but it's not like I hurt him." The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. David Chun had represented Marcus through several difficult situations, but this was clearly beyond his expertise. "Marcus, I'm going to need to research British assault laws and contact our London partners. In the meantime, you need to stop running and surrender yourself to proper authorities before this gets worse." "Worse? How could it get worse?" Marcus panted into the phone. Behind him, James continued his pursuit with mechanical precision. To observers, it was becoming clear that the guard wasn't just chasing Marcus, he was hurting him. Every turn Marcus made seemed to be subtly influenced by James's position and movement. Marcus thought he was choosing his own route, but James was actually guiding him toward a specific destination. The Metropolitan Police had been receiving calls about the situation for the past 15 minutes, and units were being deployed to intercept the unusual chase. But coordinating the response was complicated by the fact that Marcus kept moving, the crowd was growing larger, and social media was creating additional chaos as people rushed to the area, hoping to witness the spectacle in person. Marcus turned down a narrow side street near Westminster, hoping to find refuge in a shop or restaurant, but discovered that James had somehow anticipated his move. The guard appeared at the other end of the street, having taken a shorter route that his familiarity with London's geography had made possible. For the first time since the chase began, Marcus found himself face-to-face with his pursuer again. Both men stood about 30 feet apart in the narrow street, with the crowd gathered at both ends like spectators at a boxing match. Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. "Look, soldier, guard, whatever your name is, I think we've both had enough of this. I'm sorry about the spitting thing, okay? It was rude and inappropriate, and I apologize." Can we just call it even and go our separate ways? James stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Marcus with the same unwavering attention he had shown at his post. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the narrow street to both Marcus and the crowd beyond. Sir, my name is Guard James Mitchell of Her Majesty's Coldstream Guards. I have served 2 tours in Afghanistan and have been decorated for valor in combat. You have insulted my service, my uniform, and my honor. You have assaulted me while I was performing my duties in protection of the crown. Your apology is noted, but does not absolve you of the legal consequences of your actions. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just an angry tourist attraction who had been pushed too far. This was a legitimate military veteran with combat experience who took his duties seriously and understood exactly what lines had been crossed. I understand you're upset, Marcus tried again, but surely we can work something out. I'm prepared to make a substantial donation to a military charity of your choice. Say £1 million? That's got to be worth more than pursuing this ridiculous arrest thing. The crowd stirred at the mention of such a large sum, but James's expression didn't change. Sir, you are attempting to bribe a member of Her Majesty's forces. That is an additional criminal offense under British law. Marcus's face went pale as he realized he had just made his situation significantly worse while being recorded by dozens of cameras. Every word he spoke was digging him deeper into legal trouble, but his panic was overriding his judgment. Fine, Marcus shouted, his composure finally snapping completely. You want to play games? I've got news for you, soldier boy. I have more money than your entire military budget. I have connections in the American government. I can make one phone call and have diplomatic pressure brought down on this whole country. You think you can intimidate me with your little costume and your fake authority? I eat people like you for breakfast. The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile. Booing and angry shouts erupted from both ends of the street. Someone threw an empty water bottle that bounced off the wall near Marcus's head. The British sense of fair play was deeply offended by watching someone threaten a soldier who was simply doing his duty. James listened to the entire outburst without moving, then responded in the same calm, controlled voice he had maintained throughout the encounter. Sir, you have now added threatening behavior to your list of offenses. You are also being recorded making threats against a member of the British military in front of approximately 200 witnesses. I suggest you exercise your right to remain silent before you further incriminate yourself. That was when Marcus heard the sound that would haunt him for months to come. Sirens. Multiple sirens, coming from several directions, growing louder with each passing second. The Metropolitan Police had finally coordinated their response, and units were converging on the scene. Marcus looked around desperately, but the narrow street offered no escape routes. The crowd blocked both ends. James blocked the middle, and the sirens indicated that official authorities were about to arrive. For the first time since stepping out of his luxury car that morning, Marcus Goldstein realized that his money, his status, and his American citizenship weren't going to save him from the consequences of his actions. The chase was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. The first police car arrived with its sirens wailing and blue lights flashing, followed quickly by 2 more vehicles and a police van. The narrow street that had become Marcus's trap was suddenly filled with the authority of the Metropolitan Police, their presence transforming the chaotic scene into something official and serious. Inspector Sarah Thompson stepped out of the lead vehicle, a veteran officer with 23 years of experience who had seen everything London could throw at her. But as she surveyed the scene before her, hundreds of people with cameras, a perfectly uniformed Queen's Guard standing at attention, and a disheveled American in an expensive suit backed against a wall. She knew this was going to be unlike anything in her case files. Right then, Inspector Thompson announced in a voice that carried the natural authority of someone accustomed to taking control of chaotic situations. I need everyone except the principals to step back and give us some working room. This is now an official police matter. The crowd reluctantly moved back, but phones remained raised and recording. The story had gone too viral for anyone to stop watching now. Live streams were broadcasting the scene to millions of viewers worldwide, and news organizations were scrambling to get their own crews to the location. Inspector Thompson approached James first, recognizing the military protocol involved in addressing a member of the Queen's Guard. Guard Mitchell, I presume? I've been briefed on the situation by radio. Can you provide me with your account of what transpired? James came to attention, his bearing shifting into the formal military posture required when addressing civilian authority in an official capacity. Yes, ma'am. At approximately 10:47 hours, while I was on duty at Buckingham Palace, the gentleman in question began verbally harassing me and making inappropriate offers of money for me to break protocol. When I maintained my position as required, he became increasingly aggressive and ultimately committed assault by spitting on my uniform. Inspector Thompson nodded, making notes in her notebook while glancing at Marcus, who was still pressed against the wall looking like a cornered animal. And the subsequent pursuit? When the gentleman attempted to leave the scene after committing assault, I exercised my authority to place him under citizen's arrest and followed to ensure he remained available for proper authorities. James replied with military precision. I see. And you maintained appropriate distance and used no physical force during this pursuit. Correct, ma'am. I followed at a safe distance and made no threatening gestures or statements beyond informing him of his legal situation. Inspector Thompson was impressed despite herself. In 23 years of policing, she had rarely seen such restraint and professionalism in a volatile situation. She turned to Marcus, who was still breathing heavily from his extended run through London. And you would be Mr. Marcus Goldstein, I assume? American citizen. Marcus straightened up, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. Yes, that's right. And I want to lodge a formal complaint against this man for harassment and stalking. He chased me through half of London. I felt threatened and in fear for my safety. Inspector Thompson raised an eyebrow. Mr. Goldstein, I need to inform you that you are under arrest on suspicion of assault, threatening behavior, and breach of the peace. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Marcus's mouth fell open. You're arresting me? This is outrageous. I'm the victim here. That man stalked me through your city, and you're arresting me. Sir, I have approximately 40 witnesses with video evidence showing you spitting on a member of Her Majesty's Guard, then threatening him when he lawfully attempted to detain you. Unless you have evidence to the contrary, I suggest you exercise your right to remain silent. The crowd murmured with satisfaction as Marcus was fitted with handcuffs. The sight of the arrogant American tourist being arrested while the dignified British guard stood at perfect attention was exactly the ending most observers had been hoping for. Marcus's assistant Jennifer finally arrived on the scene, having tracked down the chaos through social media posts. She pushed through the crowd just in time to see her boss being loaded into the back of a police van. Marcus, I've been trying to reach you. What happened? The internet is going crazy with videos of you. Marcus looked at her desperately through the van's window. Jennifer, call David Chin immediately. Tell him I need the best criminal lawyer in London, and I need diplomatic intervention from the embassy. This whole thing is a setup. Jennifer pulled out her phone and saw that Marcus's name was trending globally on every social media platform. The videos of the incident had been viewed millions of times in just the past hour. Her phone was buzzing with calls from journalists, business partners, and family members who had seen the footage. Inspector Thompson approached Jennifer with a sympathetic expression. Are you associated with Mr. Goldstein? I'm afraid he's going to be processed through the system and held pending formal charges. If you need to contact the American embassy or arrange legal representation, now would be the time to do so. As the police van pulled away with Marcus inside, Inspector Thompson turned back to James, who had remained at attention throughout the entire arrest process. Guard Mitchell, you'll need to come to the station to provide a formal statement and evidence collection for your uniform. There will also be an internal review of your actions, though I suspect that will be largely a formality given the circumstances. James nodded. Of course, ma'am. However, I should note that I abandoned my post to pursue Mr. Goldstein. I'm prepared to face any disciplinary action from my commanding officer. Inspector Thompson smiled for the first time since arriving on the scene. Something tells me your superiors are going to be rather proud of how you handled this situation, Guard Mitchell. The entire incident has been recorded from multiple angles, and your professionalism throughout has been exemplary. As the official vehicles departed, the crowd began to disperse, but many people lingered to discuss what they had witnessed. Street vendors who had followed the chase were doing booming business selling snacks and drinks to people who wanted to stay in the area and continue talking about the unprecedented events. The story was already being picked up by international news outlets. CNN, BBC World Service, Fox News, and dozens of other organizations were preparing special reports. The incident was being analyzed from every angle: American entitlement versus British tradition, the power of social media to hold people accountable, the importance of military respect, and the The universal appeal of watching arrogant bullies get their comeuppance. Back at the Metropolitan Police Station, Marcus was beginning to understand the severity of his situation. The duty solicitor assigned to his case was explaining British law in terms that were slowly penetrating his panic. Mr. Goldstein, assault in the UK includes spitting on someone, which carries a maximum penalty of 6 months in prison. Threatening behavior adds another potential 6 months. Attempting to bribe a public official can result in up to 7 years. The fact that you committed these offenses against a member of the Queen's Guard while they were on duty at a royal residence potentially elevates the charges further. Marcus stared at the lawyer in disbelief. This is insane. It was just spit. I didn't hurt anyone. Sir, the law doesn't require physical injury for assault charges. The act of spitting on someone is considered assault, and spitting on a military service member while on duty is taken very seriously by British courts. The reality was beginning to sink in. Marcus's business empire required his constant attention and decision-making. Being held in a British jail, even for a few days, could cost him millions in missed opportunities and delayed deals. But the legal process was going to take its course regardless of his financial concerns. Meanwhile, social media was having a field day with the story. Memes were being created faster than they could be shared. Spit and run was becoming a catchphrase. Videos of the chase were being set to music, animated, and remixed. Marcus's attempt to prove his superiority had turned him into a global symbol of American tourist arrogance. The American embassy was fielding calls from journalists and trying to manage a diplomatic situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond normal consular services. Marcus was an American citizen entitled to proper treatment under British law, but his behavior had been so egregious that there was little sympathy for his plight. James, meanwhile, was completing his statement at the police station with the same precision and professionalism he had shown throughout the incident. His commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Williams, arrived to discuss the situation and its implications for James's career. Mitchell, I've reviewed the preliminary reports and watched some of the video footage, Colonel Williams said. Your handling of an unprecedented situation has been exemplary. However, leaving your post without authorization is a serious matter that requires formal review. James stood at attention. Understood, ma'am. I accept full responsibility for my actions. That said, Colonel Williams continued, the circumstances were extraordinary, and your restraint and professionalism under extreme provocation have brought credit to the regiment. The fact that you pursued the individual without using excessive force or losing your temper demonstrates exactly the kind of discipline we expect from our guards. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved that Marcus's attempt to humiliate James had instead showcased the guard's superior training, discipline, and character. The viral videos were being praised for showing the difference between earned respect and purchased privilege. As the day wore on, the story continued to evolve. Legal experts were being interviewed about British assault laws. Military historians were explaining the significance and history of the Queen's Guard. Cultural commentators were analyzing the incident as a symbol of broader issues about respect, privilege, and accountability. Marcus, sitting in his holding cell, finally understood that his money and status weren't going to make this problem disappear. For the first time in his adult life, he was facing consequences that couldn't be bought off, talked away, or delegated to someone else to handle. The man who had tried to prove that everything and everyone had a price was about to discover that some things, like honor, duty, and justice, are not for sale. 3 months after the incident that would forever be known as Spitgate, the ripple effects were still spreading across both sides of the Atlantic. What had started as one man's moment of supreme arrogance had become a cultural touchstone, a legal precedent, and a very expensive lesson in the power of consequences. Marcus Goldstein sat in the study of his Manhattan penthouse, staring at a stack of legal documents that represented the wreckage of what had once been his untouchable reputation. The man who had built a fortune on viral marketing and social media influence had become the victim of his own tools, but in the worst possible way. The British courts had not been kind to him. Despite hiring the most expensive legal team in London, Marcus had been convicted on all charges: assault, threatening behavior, attempting to bribe a public official, and a new charge that had been added specifically for his case: conduct likely to cause breach of the peace at a royal residence. The total sentence was 18 months in prison, suspended on the condition that he pay a substantial fine, complete community service, and never return to the United Kingdom. But the legal consequences were only the beginning of Marcus's troubles. The video footage of his behavior and subsequent arrest had been viewed over 500 million times across all platforms. His face had become synonymous with entitled American tourist behavior, spawning countless memes, parodies, and cultural references. Late-night talk show hosts had built entire segments around the incident. "Don't be a Marcus" had entered common usage as a warning against arrogant behavior. The business implications were devastating. 3 major clients had terminated contracts worth over $200 million, citing concerns about their brand association with Marcus's public image. His tech company's stock price had plummeted by 40% in the week following the incident and had never recovered. Board members were quietly discussing his removal as CEO. Marcus's personal life had imploded as well. His wife of 12 years had filed for divorce, taking their 2 children and half his assets with her. Friends who had enjoyed his lavish parties and expensive gifts suddenly found themselves too busy to return his calls. Social invitations dried up completely as New York's elite distanced themselves from his toxic brand. The irony was crushing. Marcus had built his empire on understanding how information spread in the digital age, how public perception could be managed and manipulated, how money could buy almost any kind of reputation. Now he was discovering that some kinds of fame couldn't be purchased away, and some reputations couldn't be rehabilitated with clever marketing. His assistant Jennifer had quit 2 weeks after the incident, unable to handle the constant barrage of media requests, legal demands, and death threats that were pouring into Marcus's offices. She had been replaced by a series of temporary workers, none of whom lasted more than a few days in the toxic environment that surrounded anything associated with Marcus Goldstein. The American Embassy in London had issued a quiet statement distancing the United States government from Marcus's behavior and praising the professionalism of the British authorities. Diplomatic sources leaked that Marcus's case had become a teaching example of how not to handle international incidents. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Guard James Mitchell had become an unlikely celebrity in his own right, though he handled the attention with the same professionalism he had shown during the original incident. James had been formally commended by his commanding officers and had received the Queen's Commendation for Exemplary Service, one of the highest honors available to a serving soldier. The citation praised his exceptional restraint and professionalism under extreme provocation while maintaining the dignity and honor of Her Majesty's Guard. More importantly for James personally, the incident had led to a significant career opportunity. He had been selected for officer training and was being fast-tracked for promotion based on his demonstrated leadership abilities under pressure. The man Marcus had tried to humiliate as a pretend soldier was being recognized as exactly the kind of person the military wanted in positions of authority. James had also become a spokesperson for military charities, using his newfound platform to raise awareness about veterans' issues and the transition from active combat duty to ceremonial service. The incident had given him a voice that reached far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. But perhaps most satisfying for James was the flood of support he had received from around the world. Letters poured in from military families, veterans, and ordinary citizens who were grateful to see someone stand up to entitled behavior with dignity and restraint. A crowdfunding campaign started by British military charities in his honor had raised over £3 million for veteran support services. The broader cultural impact of the incident continued to evolve. Universities were teaching case studies about it in classes on crisis management, international relations, and social media ethics. The video footage had been analyzed frame by experts in military protocol, legal procedure, and crowd psychology. Tourism to Buckingham Palace had actually increased following the incident, with visitors hoping to see the famous guard post where the confrontation had begun. Tour guides had added the story to their standard presentations, using it as an example of British military tradition and the importance of respecting cultural institutions. The incident had also sparked broader conversations about American tourist behavior abroad. Travel agencies began including specific cultural sensitivity training in their premium packages. The State Department added new sections to their travel advisories about respecting local customs and the potential legal consequences of inappropriate behavior. For Marcus, the months following his return to America had been a masterclass in how quickly a carefully constructed life could collapse. His legal team was still fighting extradition requests from Britain related to additional charges that had emerged during the investigation. His accountants were struggling to manage the financial fallout from canceled contracts, legal fees, and the cost of crisis management consultants who had proven unable to rehabilitate his image. The psychological impact was perhaps the most severe consequence of all. Marcus had spent his entire adult life believing that money could solve any problem, that status could protect him from consequences, that his American citizenship made him untouchable abroad. The complete failure of all these beliefs had left him questioning everything he thought he understood about the world. His therapist, Dr. Sarah Rosen, had been working with him to process the trauma of public humiliation and social exile. But progress was slow because Marcus continued to struggle with accepting responsibility for his actions. "I still don't understand how spitting on someone became this massive international incident," Marcus complained during one of their sessions. "It was just spit. I didn't hurt anyone." Dr. Rosen had heard this rationalization dozens of times. "Marcus, we've discussed this. The act itself was just the trigger. The real issue was what the act represented: disrespect for service, abuse of privilege, cultural insensitivity, and an assumption that wealth placed you above consequences." "But the punishment doesn't fit the crime," Marcus insisted. "My whole life has been destroyed over one moment of poor judgment. Has it occurred to you that this might be how the people you've mistreated in business felt when you used your wealth and power against them?" Dr. Rosen asked quietly. The question hung in the air like an accusation Marcus wasn't ready to face. As the one-year anniversary of the incident approached, media outlets were preparing retrospective pieces about Spitgate and its lasting impact. Marcus had been approached by several publishers about writing a tell-all book about his experience, but his legal team had advised against it while appeals were still pending. James Mitchell, now Lieutenant Mitchell following his promotion, continued his duties with the same quiet professionalism that had made him famous. When asked by reporters about Marcus Goldstein, he maintained the diplomatic restraint that had become his trademark. "I harbor no ill will toward Mr. Goldstein," James said during one of his rare interviews. "I hope he has learned from the experience, and that he uses whatever platform he still has to encourage better behavior from others. The military teaches us that everyone deserves the opportunity to learn from their mistakes and become better people." The grace and maturity of James's response only served to highlight the contrast between his character and Marcus's continued self-pity and blame-shifting. In the end, the incident had revealed something fundamental about character, consequences, and the difference between earned respect and purchased privilege. Marcus Goldstein had wanted to prove his superiority over a British soldier and had instead demonstrated his own moral poverty. James Mitchell had simply done his job and had become a symbol of dignity, duty, and the kind of quiet courage that can't be bought at any price. The story of the rich American tourist who spat on a royal guard had become more than viral entertainment. It had become a modern parable about hubris, humility, and the truth that in a connected world, character matters more than cash. And some lines should never be crossed, no matter how much money you have or how important you think you are. For Marcus, the lesson came too late and at too high a price. For the millions who watched his downfall, it served as a warning that in an age of smartphones and social media, everyone is just one moment of poor judgment away from accountability. And sometimes, accountability looks like a perfectly uniformed guard with infinite patience and unshakable principles, walking steadily behind you until there's nowhere left to run.